Greetings and salutations, fellow book readers. This is Mark, and the book I will review today is The Temptation to Exist. Before we continue, this is personalized limited edition of The Temptation to Exist with leather cover designed and made by me. At the end of the video, I will tell you a couple of ways of how you can get one for yourself if you are interested. Now let's get back to the review. The Temptation to Exist is a book by Romanian writer-philosopher Emil Cioran. I don't think he called himself neither, since he didn't care for labels. Cioran was born in Romania, but spent all of his adult life in Paris, which has been a safe haven for many Eastern European intellectuals and artists. I think in general, Paris always attracted intellectual thinking and artistic expression, just like London or New York attracts business acuity and money-making talent. After Romania was taken over by the communists, Cioran became stateless. I don't think he ever became a French citizen. I don't think he cared enough, and the feeling of having no home, not belonging to anywhere, have influenced his thinking. It is a mistake to think of the expatriate as someone who abdicates, who withdraws and humbles himself, resigned to his miseries, his outcast state. On a closer look, he turns out to be ambitious, aggressive in his disappointments, his very acrimony qualified by his belligerence. The more we are disposed, the more intense our appetites and illusions become. I even discern some relation between misfortune and megalomania. The man who has lost everything preserves as a last resort the hope of glory or of literary scandal. He consents to abandon everything except his name. It seems being stateless was pretty symbolic for Cioran. It made him feel free, disengaged, a man without a country, free of any superficial loyalties and attachments, and he wrote accordingly. Cioran, like many Eastern Europeans, had this seemingly dark, cheerless view of life, and even suicide was too joyful to consider it as a usable option. He said, "Don't bother killing yourself, since when it is done, it is always too late to have any effect." I think this pessimism partly comes from the region's turbulent and violent history. Many powers saw it, some still do, as the target of their expansionist politics. Russians, Germans, Turks, etc. tried to subdue and control the local population, and the accumulation of the resulting violence and suffering has been passed down through generations, and it is responsible for the region's skepticism. Cioran himself insisted on embracing failure, even basking in it. He was proud, if the word proud can ever be applied to Cioran, of never having a job and just surviving. Cioran didn't write any novels, probably considered them a waste of time. Instead, he wrote how he felt, his reflections about life. His honesty comes from writing for himself and pretending he was already dead. But in spite of all the dark thoughts, in social interactions he seemed quite jovial. He seemingly found comfort in existential confusion and suffering, in contrast to many who found only despair. Cioran is not so famous in the English-speaking world, but he has a quiet following in France. There are a few recorded interviews in French where one can get a more personal feeling of him. What is The Temptation to Exist about? It is philosophical work dealing with existentialism and nihilism. Why do we exist? Why do we even try? What is the reward? The answer seems to be nothing, so why bother? Even suicide is not a viable solution, so you might as well continue until the end. Nothing more to pursue except the pursuit of nothing. Cioran explores the themes of existential despair and the temptation to embrace non-existence as a way to escape the inherent suffering of life. For him, life is basically to endure. But I think for most humans, it is important to have present some kind of possibility or illusion that there is something better awaiting, some reward for our earthly tortures. In spite of how vague and obscure the whole idea seems, it is what makes religion so attractive. A bit of the plot. There is really no plot, so let's just break down the book structure and subjects. The foreword mentions Cioran's existence in Paris, surviving by eating in the student cafeteria and spending time in the mythical Café de Flore, which had some pretty famous patrons, Joris Huysman, Picasso, occasionally Hemingway, and Cioran's crowd included Jean-Paul Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir, Albert Camus, and his compatriot, famous playwright Eugene Ionesco. The introduction implies that it is Nietzsche who created the base for the 20th century philosophical thought. His influence can be seen even in the intellectuals who do not admit to being influenced by him. The idea is that the philosopher, in order to progress, sacrifices his intellect, also happiness, social life, and possibly even sanity, as was the case with Nietzsche. And it seems Cioran was heading there at the end of his life as well. The book is broken into a few different chapters, focused on different aspects of existential struggle. In the chapter titled "The Thinking Against Ourselves," Cioran explores the individual and suggests it is he who is the maker of his destiny, which is rooted in violence and contradictions. Blasted by the curse attached to acts, the man of violence forces his nature, rises above himself only to relapse, an aggressor followed by his enterprises, which come to punish him for having instigated them. We are our worst enemy, engage in self-destruction, and our achievements follow it, and because we are tenacious, we don't give up, and keep repeating the disastrous and suicidal cycle. Faithful to his appearances, the man of violence is not discouraged. He starts all over again and persists since he cannot exempt himself from suffering. His occasional efforts to destroy others are merely a roundabout route to his own destruction. Beneath his self-confidence, his braggadocio, lurks a fanatic of disaster. Hence it is among the violent that we meet the enemies of themselves. And we all are violent, men of anger who, having lost the key of quietude, now have access only to the secret of laceration. Cioran says that to find liberation we have to reconquer life, but to achieve this we have first to abolish it, more destruction, and to resist happiness because the resistance, the suffering, is more interesting. He seems to imply that the man is a self-contained universe, an absolute. I am both wound and the knife, as said by Baudelaire, but to realize this he has to cut himself from the exterior and superficial influences. The beggar has nothing, so he is himself. In the next chapter, on a wounded civilization, Cioran uses the trajectory of nations and civilizations as a metaphor for individual existence, how some grow, achieve success, mature and fall. Eventually everybody falls if they live long enough. He mentions the French and the English, but it is the Germans who are the most interesting case. The 20th century should have been German in the sense in which the 18th was French, but they went about it so clumsily that they only hastened its downfall. Not content with having overthrown it and left it upside down, they then made a present of it to Russia and to America, for it was in their behalf that the Germans were good at combat and collapse. Making the 19th century theirs philosophically, and instead of reaping the rewards in the 20th, they self-destructed. I am the wound and the knife again. Further, in the next chapters, A Little Theory of Destiny and Advantages of Exile, Cioran puts up a question of identity and why some countries succeed and others don't. Is it destiny? And he questions if such a thing as destiny exists. There are countries which enjoy a kind of benediction, a kind of grace. Everything succeeds for them, even their misfortunes, even their catastrophes. And there are others which cannot carry it off, whose very triumphs are equivalent to failures. How does being born in one or the other impact the individual? Who does it make him into? Cioran wonders who he would be without his country. He seems to be somewhat embarrassed to have been born in Romania, but at the same time he is glad because it made him question his existence. He says we always question the suffering, not the pleasure. And what is the meaning of being a man without a country, as Cioran was for the latter part of his life? I think you can be a man without a country in your own country, as long as you keep yourself separate from any nationalistic identities and sentiments. But it is not easy to do. Our innate need to belong gets in the way. In The Peoples of Solitaries, Cioran uses Jews and their collective experience to make his point about destiny and identity. By insisting on their isolation, they, the Jews, made themselves into a target, but probably at the same time it allowed them to maintain their identity and culture. On the other hand, there were so many other groups, small and large, that opened themselves to assimilation and disappeared. They might still be physically present, but in an unrecognizable form. Well, there were many who didn't assimilate and disappeared as well. Perhaps the Jews found a sustainable balance between assimilation and isolation, but as we know from history, it wasn't easy. What keeps them going might be their temptation to exist, to live forever. Maybe they are the best example of it. Cioran also mentions that the Germans, just like Jews, believe in destiny, but were not able to understand it. How could the Germans, those Arivistites of fatality, forgive the Jews for having a destiny superior to their own? And the Germans detested in the Jews their dream realized, a universality they could not achieve. They too wanted to be chosen. Nothing predestined them to that condition. I think a lot of Cioran's understanding of the Jews and Germans must have come from Nietzsche, who seemed to have a pretty good grasp on the understanding of German hatred for Jews. And if you read his writings, original texts, there wasn't much anti-Semitism in him. I also read a great short story by Borges titled Deutsches Requiem, which for me beautifully describes the German confusion and despair. Talking about identity, we in Eastern Europe, some people will crucify me and insist we are in Central Europe, but I am referring to cultural identity, not geographic location, and this leads to my point by denying our Eastern European identity and at the same time being denied the Western European identity by the Western Europeans. We don't really know where we belong and are left somewhat without identity and with an inferiority complex. And this is how Cioran probably felt. But maybe now we are realizing the Western identity, as it is transforming or disappearing, might be not what we want or who we want to become, and we might be able to embrace our true identity, if only we could define what it is. In the latter chapters, Cioran defines boredom as the enemy, but also essential to our lives and struggle to exist. Maybe boredom is our true state because it doesn't tempt us to exist, and fighting against it is our temptation to exist. Cioran wonders about writing novels. People insist on doing it so they can be remembered. He links this to thinking about the future and missing being in the present. Existing is being in the present, and temptation to exist implies being in the future.